Welcome everyone. Today we're sharing a story from HumansAreKind TV, a series dedicated to uplifting real events that remind us of the goodness in people. This is the true story of Chris, Mowgli, and the town that refused to look away. It takes place in St. George, South Carolina, in January 2026. What you're about to see is a powerful example of how one person's compassion can spark an entire community into action, and how even the smallest towns can carry the biggest hearts. Let's begin. To understand this story, you first need to understand the setting. St. George is a small rural town in Dorchester County, South Carolina, with a population of just about 1,800 people. It's the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name, where people wave from their porches, and where word travels fast. On January 25, 2026, a rare and brutal winter storm swept through the area. Freezing rain, plunging temperatures, and icy roads brought this quiet community to a standstill. For most residents, that meant staying indoors, turning up the heat, and waiting it out. But not everyone had that option. Chris Brannan was an unhoused man living on the streets of St. George, and Mowgli was his loyal dog, his constant companion, and in many ways, his family. When the storm hit, Chris and Mowgli had no shelter, no warm room to retreat to, no walls to block the freezing rain. As temperatures plummeted and the rain turned to ice, they were left shivering out in the open, exposed to one of the worst winter storms the region had seen. This is where the story could have ended, with 2 lives lost to the cold and indifference. But that's not what happened in St. George. Enter Carlos Canales. Carlos spotted Chris out in the freezing cold and did something that many people think about, but fewer actually do. He stopped. He gave Chris all the cash he had on him. But as he drove away, he couldn't shake the image from his mind. The temperature was still dropping. So Carlos went back. He wanted to offer Chris something to eat. And that's when he saw something that haunted him. Icicles had formed on Chris's beard. That's how brutally cold it was. Carlos helped Chris get hot food, but when he got home and told his wife what he'd seen, her response changed everything. Carlos's wife said to him, "I think God is trying to tell you something." Those words hit Carlos hard. He knew she was right. Giving cash and buying a meal were good starts, but Chris and Mowgli were still out there in a life-threatening storm. So Carlos went back out into the freezing night a 3rd time. Not to give money, not to buy food, but to find Chris and Mowgli and get them to safety. When he couldn't locate them on his own, he turned to the one resource that could amplify his search, the community itself. Carlos posted a message on Facebook, reaching out to the people of St. George. He asked if anyone had seen Chris and Mowgli, or if anyone could help find them shelter from the storm. What happened next was extraordinary. The response was immediate and overwhelming. As Carlos described it, he got bombarded by phone call after phone call on Messenger. People he knew, people he didn't know, all reaching out, all wanting to help. This single social media post became the catalyst that transformed one man's concern into a community-wide rescue mission. Among those who answered Carlos's call were Lisa Stewart Westbury, a retired judge's assistant, and Ruthie Tripp, a member of the town council. These 2 women didn't hesitate. They bundled up and headed out into the frozen streets of St. George to search for Chris and Mowgli. They followed clues and updates from the community Facebook page, with neighbors chiming in about possible sightings. Ruthie Tripp later described the conditions. He had icicles on his beard, that's how cold it was, and rainy. The urgency was real. Every minute counted. And then, they found them. Lisa and Ruthie located Chris and Mowgli and brought them to a nearby hotel. But here's what makes this moment truly remarkable. By the time they arrived at the hotel, the community of St. George had already raised enough money to cover Chris and Mowgli's stay for an entire week. 7 full nights of warm, safe shelter. Think about that. In a matter of hours, a town of 1,800 people had mobilized, searched, rescued, and funded a week of housing for a stranger and his dog. This wasn't organized by a charity or a government program. This was neighbors taking care of a neighbor. But the generosity didn't stop at a hotel room. What followed was a wave of kindness that just kept building. Over 70 individual acts of generosity poured in. People donated cash to keep Chris sheltered, Warm meals were delivered to him daily. Community members brought winter clothing and blankets. And someone even brought a warm coat for Mowgli, because in St. George the dog mattered too, as Lisa Stewart Westbury put it. Our community, when we ask, we get. That's the spirit of this town. When the call goes out, people show up. Now I want to tell you about Holly Noble, because her story captures something essential about what happened in St. George. Holly is a local EMT. When she saw Carlos's Facebook post, she responded immediately, not with money for Chris, but with a winter coat for Mowgli. What makes Holly's act so extraordinary is her own situation. She was barely making ends meet herself. In her own words, I literally had to borrow some gas money just to get to work to get to the next paycheck. But she sat down, calculated her mileage, figured out she had just enough gas to make the trip, and she went. She didn't let her own struggle stop her from helping someone in an even more desperate situation. Holly's words here deserve a moment of reflection. She said, I slept in my truck with my dog before. I know what it's like. She understood Chris's situation not from a place of pity, but from a place of personal experience. And then she added something that speaks volumes about her character. Thank God nobody judged me. And I'm definitely not going to sit there and judge him. I don't know his story. I just wanted to help. I wanted to do what I could. This is empathy in its purest form. Not judging, not questioning, just showing up and doing what you can with what you have. Holly reminds us that you don't need to have a lot to give a lot. Carlos Canales reflected on what he witnessed, and his observation cuts to the heart of this story. He said, what struck me was the diversity of different people from different backgrounds. That speaks volumes right there. This wasn't one group helping another. This was an entire community. People of all ages, races, backgrounds, and income levels, coming together for a common purpose. Some of the people who helped didn't have much themselves. But they gave anyway. In a town of 1,800, it wasn't the size of each individual gift that mattered. It was the collective decision, made independently by dozens of people, to show up for a stranger. As reported by CBS News in February 2026, this story resonated far beyond the borders of St. George. The story of Chris, Mowgli, and the people of St. George was picked up by CBS News in February 26, and it inspired viewers across the nation. Let's reflect on the 3 layers of impact here. First, one man's compassion. Carlos chose to act, not once but 3 times. He gave money, he came back with food, and he came back again to search. Second, a community united. Over 70 acts of kindness from people of all backgrounds turned one person's concern into a collective rescue. And third, a nation inspired. When CBS aired this story, it reminded millions of Americans that compassion, generosity, and community spirit are alive and well, even in the smallest of towns. What began as one man stopping to help became a movement that proved small towns can carry enormous heart. As we close, I want to leave you with this thought. Kindness is never wasted. Every single act of compassion creates a ripple, and you never know whose life you might change today. Chris and Mowgli's story could have ended very differently. But because Carlos stopped, because his wife spoke up, because Lisa and Ruthie searched, because Holly drove through the cold, and because dozens of others gave what they could, 2 lives were saved. That's the power of community. That's the power of choosing not to look away. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share HumansAreKind TV so we can continue bringing you these uplifting real events. Together, we can spread the message that humanity is fundamentally good.